Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm joined by blockbuster suspense novelists Tess Gerritsen and Gary Braver. Longtime friends, the two recently decided to collaborate on a book. The result is Choose Me, a provocative Me Too-era mystery in which an illicit affair between a college student and her professor turns deadly. Internationally best-selling author Tess Gerritsen studied medicine and worked as a physician before embracing the writing life full-time. Her impressive body of work includes romantic suspense, standalone medical thrillers, a historical mystery, and the beloved Rizzoli and Isles series, which spawned TNT's hit television show starring Angie Harmon and Sasha Alexander. Her books have sold more than 30 million copies and been translated into 40 languages. Gary Braver, the pseudonym of English professor Gary Gashgarian, studied physics before settling into academia, where he teaches classes in science fiction, modern bestsellers, horror, and fiction writing at Northeastern University. Also the critically acclaimed author of 8 previous titles, his novel Flashback holds the distinction of being the only thriller to have won the Massachusetts Book Award. An Amazon bestseller, Choose Me marries procedural elements and psychological suspense with complex characters and a mystifying crime. Is Taryn Moore a victim? Is English professor Jack Dorian a killer? It's up to Boston detective Frankie Loomis to find out. Library Journal gave Choose Me a starred review, noting, "With deceitful characters and plenty of twists, this novel is highly recommended for fans of Gerritsen or Braver and readers who love suspense stories." Now, two masters of the craft, Tess Gerritsen and Gary Braver, reveal the secrets of their killer collaboration. Hi everybody, welcome back to Central Booking. I am doubly delighted today to be in the company of Tess Gerritsen and Gary Braver, who are the co-authors of Choose Me, which comes out on July 1st. Welcome to the show, my friends.
Oh, great to be here.
Thank you. Nice being here.
Thank you. So, July 1st is coming up really quick, and I was excited because I had an arc that I read, and then this beautiful finished copy showed up the other day, and I said, all right, I gotta, hold that up. And the really, really cool thing about these books from, Amazon, from Thomas and Mercer, is if you take the cover off, there's always like cool artwork underneath, and I think a lot of times people don't realize that, so it's like a mystery within a mystery. But, I have to say, too, I love it because the title is Choose Me, which is a bit provocative, but why wouldn't you? Because it has Tess Gerritsen and Gary Braver. Your names are on the cover. If you don't choose this book, there's something wrong with you. Not that I like to pass judgment, but I feel like that's an easy one. So anyway, first question, before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the book, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just giving us a very brief elevator pitch for that. And I thought that I would, divide this between the two of you because the book alternates time frames and perspectives. So I thought that one of you maybe can give us, the after story where we open, and then the other of you could really quickly give us the before. And that way we get an idea of the premise and the characters who carry us throughout. And I guess I'll start with you, Tess, and then you get to pick if you want the after or the before.
Well, I will do the after story because that is really my character, my female detective. It opens up with a dead girl on the sidewalk who appears to have fallen out of her apartment balcony. Is it suicide or is there something else? And my detective, Detective Frankie Loomis, who is a woman and a mother of twins, realizes there's something not quite right, and she decides to dig into what really happened to this college student named Taryn Moore. And now we go to the after story, or the before story, I guess.
Okay. The before story centers on Jack Dorian, who is a charismatic English professor at a Boston University, and his home life is not ideal. His wife has a treadmill kind of existence as a very dedicated physician, and he feels like he's living a bachelor life again because when she comes home, she's kind of wasted and tired, and they haven't got time for each other, for intimacy. And meanwhile, in a seminar he's teaching called Star-Crossed Lovers, he's got this very alluring, very bright, and very provocative student, a needy student who is making moon eyes at him. And he is tempted against his better judgment, and sparks begin to fly.
Wow, you were both very good at that. That was concise, but you have the premise right off the bat, which is terrific. And so before we come back to the plot specifically, I do have to ask you about the obvious. You both have very, distinguished writing careers on your own. So I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to collaborate on a book? And having been friends, for a very long time, I think I read something like 25 years, was there any trepidation into entering in a working relationship with somebody that you already have a really strong friendship with?
Well, I'll take this one. Let's put it. It was a cocktail party, okay? Um, Gary and I've known each other for a long time. I've respected his writing. I've enjoyed his books, and so we're standing at this cocktail party at Christmas in Boston, and the Me Too movement was at its height. We were hearing everything about all these really terrible things that men had been doing, and I thought every illicit affair has two sides to a story. There's the male side and the female side. And wouldn't it be interesting to do a Me Too story, but told from both the man's and the woman's point of view? And wouldn't it be fun if a man wrote the guy and a woman wrote the female point, and it was like, let's do it. And that's how this came about.
Sure. And so, Gary, did you have the, same response, or, would your response have been different if it wasn't over a cocktail party?
When Tess asked me if I'd like to co-write a book with her, I said, give me a nanosecond to think this over. And I was absolutely thrilled and honored, and I loved the idea. And Me Too was in the air, as he said. And, it really was. It's a matter of point of view. I would do the point of view of the guy who violates his marriage vows, violates the compliance of the Title IX federal restrictions in colleges and universities, and so we just decided to launch that, and we just kind of outlined together and passed back and forth, and we eventually came up with a storyline.
Sure.
It's really very much a story of a train wreck.
Yes.
We all like to see train wrecks, and
Right.
we know from the very beginning that this is going to turn out badly for somebody, and probably for everybody. And what do characters do? How do they deal with their trespasses and their incredible guilt? And how do they save their lives after they've made a mistake? So it's not just a mystery. I think it's more of it's a story of human frailty and all the things that go wrong when you make a mistake.
Absolutely. And we will certainly get into that. And, to Gary's point, yes, I suppose if Tess Gerritsen turns to you at a party and says, you want to write a book with me, I mean, who the heck is going to say no?
Exactly.
So, all right. So I was going to ask you, about the writing itself, but you both have sort of clued me in, which was great because, I was wondering, did somebody write the past? Did somebody write the present? Did somebody write the male versus the female? But I didn't want to make assumptions because, who knows? But can you tell me a little bit about how the writing, itself happened when you're in two different places working on a collaborative book that somehow has to come together cohesively? Would one person write and then another person edit? Were you writing in tandem? I guess I'll start with you, Gary, and then Tess, if you have anything to add, please do.
I think we pretty much wrote them in tandem. I would write a chapter. I would send it off to Tess and get her input. And if she saw something that needed work, I knew what she meant. Part of having written so many books all together, we know what things need to be changed or added. And so it was kind of an instantaneous understanding. And it was almost all by email. And she would send me her chapters and I would make commentary on it and back and forth. And eventually, the puzzle pieces fit together.
Yeah. Sure. It was a complicated puzzle, though, because we wrote it in chronological order. The events would happen, so we started off with Jack meeting Taryn and the affair and what goes on after that. And then the detective Frankie doesn't come into the story until after Taryn is dead. So she doesn't show up until 2/3 of the way through the book. So we had that chronological order, but then we realized, and the editor said we wanted to see that detective in earlier. So that's how we ended up with the before and after structure. And it was like taking this picture, cutting it up into little pieces, and trying to reconnect all the pieces in a way that made sense. And that was a real challenge.
Sure, it's like the director's cut of the movie where all of a sudden, you're seeing something completely different than was first aired in the theater. And I was actually going to, ask you about that, the framework of the book, because it is quite complicated. You have multiple perspectives and time frames. And so it wasn't initially conceived that way, which answers one of my questions. But what do you think, of that framework heightens sort of the overall suspense of the book that may not have been there first, and besides just having Detective Frankie come in much, much later?
From the copy on the back of the book, it's a murder mystery. And so that there is going to be a body. And when Tess decided to move Frankie and the body up front, it made absolute sense. So you negate the expectation. It's there. You have that right there, and then it becomes a before and after, as Tess said, and it just made sense. There was still the arc, and there would still be before and after of what you're watching. This is a story that is more character driven than plot driven. So you're watching the evolution of the characters, the guilt and part of Jack's part, the disappointment on the part of Taryn's part, and the investigatory aspect of Frankie's part. So it worked. Yeah.
We're going back to the train wreck metaphor. You're seeing the train wreck, and now you want to know how it got there. So that's really what the structure did for us.
Yeah, there's a why done it and a who done it.
And one after, and it, and so let me ask you too. Assuming, and I'm assuming, but assuming there were disagreements of opinion or, alternate thoughts, how did you, resolve those in an amicable way where you're still obviously friends and you can laugh together? So obviously it was, overall a good experience. But when that comes up between friends, how do you, set the personal relationship aside for the sake of the book and resolve any of those issues?
I think most of the disagreements had to do with how the readers would perceive Jack, because Jack was the most important character in this story. It's really his story. And do we like him or do we not like him? And it's hard to follow him if you don't have some kind of sympathy for him, or at least empathy for him. And I think that part of what we were dealing with was what women have an idealized view of how men view us. And I didn't want Jack to be, I hate to say it, too much of a guy. I wanted him to be a little softer than maybe a real man would be. So he may not be as realistic a portrait of a real man, but he had to be acceptable to the female readership. And I think that's what I did mostly, was sort of soften Jack up a little bit to make him likable for women.
Right, yeah. And I didn't want to make him a womanizer. I didn't want to make a Lothario on campus. And so the sense of guilt is haunts him. And that to me was the most important sympathizing aspect of the character, if we can use that as sympathizing. And when he says that he never knew that guilt would be so annihilating, that was what drives him. That is what his character development is by the end of the book. His regret and his remorse. At the beginning of the book, you always ask, what does my character want and what does my character fear? My character wants love, and what he fears is losing his marriage, losing his job. And that's what's true of that. Yeah.
I was thinking in my head to what you said, Tess. I think part of the reason, that I really liked the Jack character is because I've never seen myself as like the real man. There are softer edges and not just all the flub that's there. But anyway, I digress. I do that a lot. So next question, and then I will ask you a bit more specifically about the book. But now that I've asked you why you came to this collaboration and really how you made it work, I want to ask each of you what you think the greatest strength the other person brought to this story was, and whoever wants to start can go ahead.
Well, I can say that first of all, Gary did a superb job of portraying guilt. I mean, I think that sense of how somebody can be completely tortured by it and their lives destroyed, that was what he needed to do, and he delivered in spades. And I think the other thing he brought to it was, of course, his perspective of what it's like to be a professor on a university campus. I mean, I could make it up, but he's been there. So I think that little bit of realism was very important to the story.
And Tess's strength, of course, is with the character of Frankie. I mean, she had a sense of Taryn. She knew Taryn was needy and how far she would go in her obsession. But also Frankie, the middle-aged mother of two, who is a detective, who is rational, and also has an emotional aspect, and she has had loss in her life. She put that together brilliantly. And, you know, having done Rizzoli and Isles, this was a whole different character from those two characters. And she did a great job. A middle-aged homicide cop in Boston and a mother and divorcee. You know, did well.
You know, I'm going to skip ahead because I did want to ask you about Detective Frankie. And, you know, now that I know that that was pretty much your character, Tess, what I love, you know, about her is, like you mentioned, she's a middle-aged woman. She's described as pretty much physically unremarkable. And so she's accustomed to being overlooked and underestimated. And she sort of uses that to her advantage in her investigation. So one, can you talk about how that plays into her techniques? But then also, can you talk about her background as, you know, a widowed mother of two 18-year-old girls, how that also plays into her understanding of what she's seeing unfold before her?
Frankie is me. She's, you know, she's every middle-aged woman. And all of us, when we get to be 50, 60, we become invisible. And that is a problem because nobody pays attention to us, but it's also an advantage if you're a spy or if you're a cop. So that's exactly what she's doing. She's using her invisibility to her advantage. The fact that she's a mother of twin girls. I mean, I'm a mom too, so I was bringing in that wisdom that comes with parenthood. When you start to understand the secret lives that teenagers have, it gives her this perspective that really allows her to look at this crime scene and think about, there was a young woman who lived here, what was she going through, and I need to dig deeper. So it's that wisdom that comes with age that maybe a 25-year-old detective would not have.
Sure. Well, she was a great character, so I hope we'll see her again, but I'll ask you about that later. So back to the book itself and sort of the premise. We do know, you know, right off the bat that Taryn is killed. Obviously, this has happened, and we have to figure out if she killed herself or if she was killed by somebody else. And so consequently, there's really the need to enter her headspace and get an idea of her frame of mind and the other characters, you know, as well. But I'm wondering if you can talk about the challenges of creating and sustaining that type of psychological suspense, which is a bit different than, you know, a procedural where you're following the steps to solve the crime. Whereas here, you're really in these characters' heads for the entirety of the book. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, you know, talking about that as it pertains to the characters that you were working with. And maybe I'll start with you this time, Gary.
The awareness on the part of Jack that he is going to violate his marriage vows, that he is going to, you know, break the Title IX obligation and compliance, is with him. And it was just, you know, I know I'm with students all day long, and I know that some instructors have had affairs with students. It was, you know, it was kind of tolerated years and years ago, but with Title IX, you're constantly watching yourself. And so I was aware of that, at the same time aware of that he was slipping, he was going off the rails. And, you know, it was just kind of the profile of his personality that would drive him to make wrong decisions and hopefully to correct it by the end. Yes. And that's, you know, that's what led to the end. Acceptance of his, you know, of what he has done wrong.
Okay. Well, Taryn, she was a tough character to create because basically she's not a very likable person. So I had to somehow write a young woman who was obsessive and needy and yet incredibly attractive and seductive. But in the end, I wanted you to understand who she was and to feel some sense of empathy for how she got to be who she is. So I think that she was way more difficult for me to write than Frankie. Frankie is me. Taryn is like hopefully the opposite of me. So part of part of it is trying to make her seductive and attractive. But on the other hand, you have to put in that dark side to her and figure out how that dark side got there. And in the end, feel like, okay, I feel sorry for this victim. I didn't like her, but I feel sorry for this victim. That was the challenge.
Sure. And I think it played very well for both characters, because I found myself really feeling for both of them and thinking about how damaged they were, the damage that had been done to them, the damage that they were doing to ourselves, which, you
Right.
know, themselves didn't make anything any better. But I think, again, that played really well because there was that gray area. And I did want to ask you about sort of the ambiguity there, because Gary, you mentioned, with Title IX, that affairs between, students and college professors, there is more on the line now than maybe there used to be. But the book is, it seems almost a familiar story. We've all read the story about the illicit affair between the student and the teacher. But here, it's not really an issue of consent. It's not, the high school teacher and somebody who's underage. So it's almost a different, bag that you're opening, a different can of worms. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind, talking about morality versus legality, and how you sort of perceived that in this book to make your characters relatable and, maybe do things that were unlikable while still having them be either likable or sympathetic or empathetic in some way.
The morality is clear with what he had done in violation, and the legality is he could lose his job. So that's always behind it. That is always his haunting, and his interaction with Karen is both professorial as well as hormonal, and so he is fighting that constantly. At the same time, he goes home to his wife and wishes they could be the way they used to be. So there's this constant tension, that knowing also that I could lose my marriage, I could lose my career. So there's the morality versus legality, as you said, it's a dichotomy he's got to deal with. And it puts him in a very razor thin kind of line he has to walk and trying to correct once he is caught. Yeah.
And I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Tess, or if you want me to move on.
I think what we're doing is we're trying to deal with real people, and real people make mistakes. And
Exactly.
the best husband in the world will possibly stray, and can you forgive that? That's the whole premise is, can we forgive terrible trespasses against us? And the person is basically a good person.
Right.
Nobody's perfect.
Sure. No, it's a very thought-provoking book, and it does make you think, yes, life is very messy at times. That was one of my takeaways. Life is messy, and you got to put it all back together. And so, okay, this question more specific to Gary, and Tess had mentioned this already, the book does play out against sort of the world of academia, where there is inherent, personal drama, political drama. You yourself are an award-winning teacher, and at Northeastern, and you've been for many years. Can you talk about, bringing that as a setting to life and drawing in those dramas that you've seen? And also, is it at all difficult to write an environment that you are still a part of, and you want people to remember this is fiction, this is not memoir, autobiography, this is not my life, but people still see you as a professor, so I don't know if there's worries about that crossover where perception might not be what it should be.
This is not autobiographical, so I from the start, it's a familiar environment to me, and it is an environment that led me to think, what would be the theme that we're going to deal with here? This is new wine in an old bottle, and how we execute it would make it stand out. So I decided to have him academically teach a course that would be about star-crossed lovers from antiquity to Gone Girl. And that became the thematic glue that held it together, as well as the characters acting out some of those very patterns of the ancients, or the literary forerunners. So that, and I know the academic world, I know, the Title IX, that I know what it's like to have students constantly coming into you and, asking you for advice and personal life advice, as well as academic life advice. So I was able to draw from a lot of circumstances and a lot of experience.
Sure. And I have to say, reading about your career, I kept wishing that when I was in college, we had, somebody who was teaching science fiction and horror and popular fiction. I mean, where were those classes? I would have taken all of them. But that sort of lends itself to my next question. You just mentioned that, Jack and Taryn, they share this seminar. He teaches the star-crossed lover seminar. She's a student in that. And so there's sort of an inventory of literature pertaining to that, classic literature. And then their lives sort of imitate the art that he's teaching, that she's studying. So I wanted to ask, how you brought that to life in a way that was engaging. And then I wanted to ask Tess, as a reader of that, but not being the teacher of it, was she sort of the counterbalance, to say, all right, too much academia, too much knowledge versus this is very readable and cohesive. I imagine, there's a balancing act with getting those thematic elements in, but not necessarily beating the reader over the head with it.
I think it's a matter of point of view and what people think and what people say that determines how realistic this is. I know how students think, kind of. I know how they sound in class. So putting in an environment that I was familiar with and having the kind of round table commentary of different students, and in fact, the little hostilities, the little jabs you get, I'm familiar with that. I'm also familiar with students coming in and saying, I need help, or students coming in and, asking for personal advice to love issues. And I think anyone who's been around for long enough in the academic world gets that. Also, just the physical environment added to the stage setting. And I think that all just came in from the familiarity of what I've been doing as an adult for the last several decades.
Sure. No, I loved that. I learned, I almost felt like I was taking the course, which was terrific. And then it was fun to sort of apply what Taryn's learning to then what she's doing, what Jack are doing, what they're doing together. Because, you can foresee it all coming. And I wasn't sure if it was a balancing act, with portraying those themes from classic literature, but not losing sort of narrative momentum. So what was that like for you, Tess, reading, those segments and being in that classroom, in that environment?
Well, I was actually bouncing off the Aeneid because I had read that recently before we even got started on this project, and I was very taken by the emotionality of what it's like to be abandoned, because it's about Aeneas, the hero of the Trojan War, who falls in love or has an affair with Queen Dido, and he abandons her, and she responds by committing suicide on her own funeral pyre. Because she's so grief-stricken. So when I saw that, I was trying to draw on the emotions of that ancient story. What is it like to be abandoned? Would you kill yourself? And now Dido does this pitiful thing of committing suicide. Taryn is not going to do that. She's stronger. She's much more of a woman warrior. And so I think the literary background to the story provides the emotions that you need for the current day story.
Sure. And it was very interesting. One of the big questions is who's the hero, who's the martyr, who really is suffering the most for love or for a cause. And that was an interesting question that sort of, pulls throughout the book and again mirrors that literature. So to move away from this book, because I think that we've talked a lot about it and I don't want to spoil it because people are really going to enjoy it, but I did want to ask you about your previous careers, because you both, could have had long-term careers in sort of other arenas, and yet you came to writing. So Tess, you were a physician. Gary, I believe, you studied, you were a physicist, a private physicist, and yet somehow you've both come to writing now, in addition to your career in academia, Gary, and you've been in this arena for decades. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about your individual journeys and how the unique backgrounds that you have both helped and hindered you in that process. And I guess I'll start with you this time, Tess.
Oh, well, actually, I was a writer before I became a doctor. I wrote my first book when I was 7 years old, and I knew I wanted to be a novelist. My dad said, that's not a good idea. So I went to medical school because I like science anyway, and I was interested in medicine. But that writing bug never left me. I wrote all the way through medical school, through my internship, and when I went home for maternity leave for my first son, I wrote my first book. So and after I published a couple of those, I realized, I was right when I was 7 years old. This is what I'm meant to do. However, the medical profession, I mean, having been a doctor, it provided me with a lot of material. It allowed me to easily write about medical doctors and my characters, and it was the foundation I needed to do medical thrillers.
Sure, and I love too, now you get to scrawl your names in books instead of on scripts. So you still, you get to do that, which is lovely. And I think that what people might not know about you is, I mean, everybody knows Rizzoli and Isles, but you've done romantic suspense, at the beginning of your career, straight up medical thrillers, historical. So you've been, all around the map.
Don't forget sci-fi.
Oh, and sci-fi. Oh, there you go. I mean, there you go, Gary.
Yeah, I did like
So yeah, let me ask you, Gary, your background and how it led you here today.
I had two uncles who were scientists, chemists, and one was a metallurgist, and so I was familiar with their world. I was kind of a geeky kid, and I got a full scholarship to Worcester Polytech, a scientific institution. But in my sophomore year, I realized that words are coming to me more easily than advanced thermodynamics, and I started a human magazine. I was a editor of this and that, and so I just liked the writing process, and I decided about the second or third year there that I wanted to go to graduate school in English because I wanted to grow up and become a writer. And so I pursued those. I worked as a physicist for a while, and I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a physics lab, even though my original work at Raytheon was like a James Bond dream. It's a very exotic weaponry. And so when I got to graduate school, I got the degrees, and what really helped trigger my interest in writing was my office mate was Robert B. Parker. So I watched him become, Robert B. Parker. He was Big Bobo to my kids and to us, and we were his closest personal friend. So I watched him demythologize the process of writing. And when I finally had a story, I just kicked in, and he was very encouraging, and having it happen to him. So, yeah.
Wow.
I took, yeah. But one final thing is, one does not learn how to write until one really knows how to read well. In teaching other people's books, and the way I looked at like a carpenter looks at a house, I learned how this was done. It was just a matter of studying other people's writing until it became part of the deeper structure.
Sure. All right, a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you get back to your day. But I did want to ask too, in publishing, there tends to be this need to produce on a consistent schedule because it's all about maintaining your readership or growing your readership. So how does writing a collaborative book like this with a different publisher, how does that, impact the other writing that you do? Because all of a sudden, you have this book that you're working on, people are expecting your, novels that come out under your own names as well. So can you talk a little bit about the pressures that exist in publishing and how you pick and choose what it is that you're going to do next, and then balance that with either, the contracts that you have or just the expectations that people have of you?
I used to be on a treadmill. Okay. I used to be a book a year girl, a book a year. And, now I'm working on my 31st book, but I'm also older. And I got to the point where I realized I don't want to write the same book that everybody wants every year. I don't want to keep on writing Rizzoli and Isles. So I made a decision, maybe 5 years ago, I was not going to sign any more contracts, any more contracts with deadlines. And what it has done is it has been emotionally freeing for me. Now I write what I want to write. And if it means I'm going to be delivering a couple years late, that's how it goes. I mean, the one thing I do not want to be is regretful at the end of my life that I did not write that book that I wanted to write because I was under contract for another Rizzoli and Isles.
Sure.
But that said, I finished another Rizzoli and Isles book just a couple months ago, and it's coming out next year. So I plan to retire. I never did. It's like I cannot retire. The books just keep coming.
Well, thank you. We won't let you retire. And how about you, Gary?
This book is going to relaunch for me, a career that has been put on hold for a while. We had a bad publishing experience with someone else's book was stitched into the last book I wrote, or 2 books back, and it was yanked off the shelves, and therefore everything just kind of fell apart. So this has recharged the batteries and got me into the limelight thanks to Tess. And I've got 2 books that we're going to send out soon. And I'm working on another right now, about 2/3 through another one. So hopefully we're on our way to getting back into the groove.
Terrific.
Yeah.
So a question I always ask, because I assume, again, that there will be aspiring writers who are tuning in and maybe looking for some words of wisdom. So I typically ask, what is the best advice in terms of a creative or writing life that you ever got and that you never got but had to learn for yourself? Since there's 2 of you, you can answer both parts of that question. You can pick one or the other. And I'm going to say one of my takeaways from talking to the 2 of you today is that if you study the sciences, you're probably going to get more writing done.
Right. For me, the advice, as I said earlier, is to read closely, read people you emulate. And the other thing is to know that every single story has 2 quests. One is a kind of an outer quest, if it's a cop story, solving a crime, and the other is an inner quest, getting over some personal baggage that is personal, that is it's private. But if both those stories could coalesce so that each one is accomplished in those quests, then you would have a good story. But always telling them, know that your character has an outer quest and an inner quest. The outer quest for Jack, I want more intimacy. The inner quest, I don't want to lose my wife.
I'm not nearly that analytical about writing. I just, the 2 pieces of advice I would have, and Gary will probably disagree with this first one, is don't stop to edit. Write that first draft from beginning to end, because you don't want to get stuck in your progress by trying to make something perfect that is not, perfection should be the very, very last thing you think about. And the other piece of advice I have, and this is very much, it is not analytical of anything, it's very emotional, is listen for your characters' voices. When I write, I'm not really a visual writer, I'm more of an auditory writer. I hear voices and I hear them talking and I hear what kind of characters they are through what they say and how they say it. So don't be afraid to just turn off the music. And that's the other thing, is I don't use music. I turn off the music because I want to hear them talking to me. So wait for your characters' voices and they will tell the story.
Excellent. All right, last question. And you sort of already broached this a bit, but I'm wondering if you can leave us with a teaser and tell us, what we might expect next from you individually. Gary, you said you have 2 books that you're going to be shopping, and Tess, there's another Rizzoli Niles, but also might we expect another collaboration sometime in the future? Gary, if you want to take it first.
The next book is called Served Cold. It's Revenge. Served Cold is a title of a fictitious writer who is just finished his 3rd book, Served Cold. It's his breakout book, and he's hoping for bestsellerdom. It is absolutely trashed in the New York Times by an English professor who's hoping to get tenure and therefore accuses the book and the publisher of dumbing down America. And the guy who was trashed comes after him.
Oh, I love it.
So anyone who's ever got a bad review would like something like this, go after the reviewer.
Okay, so my next Rizzoli Niles book is coming out, I think it's June 2022. It is called Listen to Me, and it features Angela Rizzoli, who is Jane's mom, who is a middle-aged housewife in Revere, and she sees things out her living room window and nobody believes what she's seeing. And then I'm also working on a book, I'm probably about a quarter of the way through it, and it is a spy novel. It's based on I have an interesting little town I live in here in Maine. We've got about 5,000 people, and it seems that a lot of them are retired CIA. So I wanted to write a story about what is it like to be a retired spy, and then you get called back into service, and what if you don't want to go? So that's what I'm working on now.
Wow, that's terrific. So lots for us to look forward to. And in the meantime, people can pick up Choose Me.
Hey.
Choose this book. You won't regret it. There's no regrets here. It's a real page turner. And I was telling Gary before we signed on this morning that reading it really made me stop to think, because I read it in a matter of hours over maybe like 2 days. And then I said, this was wonderful. Bring on the next one. And then I realized that, easy reading is really hard writing and a lot of work goes into it. But
Right.
but when you get it right, it's like magic in a book. And it was a wonderful reading experience. So thank you for sharing this story with us and for being here today. It was a pleasure to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It was a pleasure being with you.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.